Hey friends, I'm back. It's time to work on a new doll. So you might remember that I made Hermione for a doll making competition. Well, it was finally time for another one. And the theme this time was the Future of Blythe. So I started brainstorming and came up with an idea for an android doll. I had all sorts of ideas swirling around in my head, but I knew that I wanted her eyes to light up. So after some research, I got started. The base Blythe doll is a stock casual affair. This means that she's a real, authentic doll and not a fake. So I started by removing the screws from the back. Then I had a lot of trouble getting the skull cap to come off. So I had to take an X-Acto blade to her head. I do not recommend doing this. Then I removed her eyes, and then I had to start making some space inside the head for all the stuff we were going to stick inside of it. First, I start by sanding off the gloss and the makeup. Then, I begin to draw out the center lines and the shapes that I want to carve. Then, with a rounded X-Acto blade, I go in and start shaping. I have this wonderful sanding tool from BB Blythe Co. on Etsy. You can really get into the finer places. Then I use other tools like my Dremel or a wood chisel. I usually start out with the lips and then move up to the nose and eyes. Now that I have the rough shapes in place, it's time to start smoothing them with finer sandpapers. I often start with 220 grit, but go up to somewhere around 1500 to 3000 grit. I've also recently tried sanding with water, and I find it comes up with a pretty good product. First, I want to mention that it's always important to wear your safety equipment. Much of the stuff is pretty darn toxic. So I first spray a layer of Mr. Super Clear, and then I pull out my pastels. Make sure that you get an artist grade pastel because you get so much more pigment out of them. I shave off some pastel powder and mix up a few different colors to get the color I want. Then I begin applying it to the doll. I first start out by adding shadows to create depth and dimension. It really helps with making the doll look more alive. Then I start slowly adding in some blush and lip color to add some pop to the face. So because of what I'm about to do to the doll, I decided I needed to define her eyes and eyelashes a little bit more. I did that by using some artist grade watercolor pencils. And the same goes for the eyebrows. I start with a light tinted watercolor pencil and slowly add in more and more color and definition. Now, this is where I go off the rails a little bit. I want my android's skin to be flesh toned, and I still want her to be pretty, but I still want her to look like an android. So I used my airbrush to paint hexagons onto her forehead. I promise, it kind of makes sense later. Then I sprayed her face with this silver paint to give it sort of that ethereal, not real quality. Then I applied gloss to the inner eye, lips, and nostrils. Then applied it to the hexagons on her forehead. So I knew that I wanted this doll to be mechanical, so I decided to give her a light-up heartbeat, which meant we were going to need to put an LED light in her body. So we bought ourselves a drill press and drilled holes through the neck, body, and through the chest. Next, I shaped the hole in the chest to be a diamond shape. And I used a small Dremel to shape the hole and also to hollow out the inside of the body. I needed to make enough room to feed up wires and the LED. Then we soldered wires to our LED light. And it worked! Yay! After feeding it through the body, it looked like this. I couldn't find a pattern for a jumpsuit, so I had to make my own. So I first wrapped the body in cellophane and then covered that in painter's tape. Then I drew out the center line and all the seam lines on the jumpsuit. Then cut out all my pattern pieces along the seam lines. I found this beautiful stretchy material that has hexagons on it. Then laid out my pattern pieces, pinned them in place, and then cut out the fabric. I designed these dart lines in order to make room for the breasts, and sewed along that edge first. Then moved on to folding over the collar and sewing it in place. Then attached the front and back pieces at the shoulder and attached the sleeves. Then sewed from the wrist to the hip on both sides. Then attached the leg pieces. Hemmed the pant leg, then sewed up one pant leg through the crotch and down through the other pant leg. Add some Velcro to the back and you've got a jumpsuit. I start by using chalk pastels to add shading and definition to the torso. Then I move on to shading the abdomen. I try to use colors that are only a few shades darker than the skin tone. Then I move on to the feet and legs. Then we modeled and 3D printed an insert for the chest cavity. We printed it using a transparent photopolymer resin. This helped to diffuse the light beautifully. I knew I wanted her body to look like it could be taken apart in pieces. So I drew these sections on with watercolor pencil and outlined these lines with pink so it looked like it was part of the body. I really liked the way this turned out. Then I used my airbrush to paint this iridescent silver paint on the body. This really helps with the not quite human look. Then I protect it all by using Mr. Super Clear. First, we need to remove the old eyes. I do this by heating up the end of a glue stick with a lighter, then attaching it to the eye chips. Once those cool, the eye chips should just pop right out. Next, I cut grooves in the eyelids so they can open all the way. Next, I cut off the backs and drilled through the eyes so they could be seen through. Then removed the old lashes and replaced them with new ones. Then painted pupils onto my glass eye chips. Now, here's where things go a little weird. We decided to make the eyes LCD screens, and figured out that we could run them off of a small Arduino board, which means we can program them to do almost anything we want them to. So say goodbye to the 4 old rotating eye chips, and say hello to the future. So we programmed a few basic things, and then practiced putting them in the head. And they look so good. So we installed them for real. Oftentimes in science fiction, you'll see that androids have implements over their ears. And that's what I wanted for my doll too. So we designed something basic in our 3D designer, then printed it with our 3D filament printer to see if it fit. Once it did, we went back in and added some more details. Then printed it with our photopolymer resin printer to get very fine details. Then we painted it with rub and buff to make it silver. And this really brought out the details. But I wanted it to look more grungy. So I watered down some black paint and painted the earpieces, but blotted off the excess so it just kind of gave it a dark, grungy look. Then went back through with a silver marker, but only marked up places that would have been shiny with wear and tear. And they look almost real. But these aren't done yet, not by a long shot. I did a lot of visual research on androids. Since I didn't go very mechanical with her face, I decided her armor needed to be more futuristic. So I drew a very rough sketch in Procreate to kind of get the idea of what I think her armor should look like. I wanted it to look like armor, but I also wanted that feminine quality, which is why I gave it a skirt. With this design in mind, we went straight to the 3D program. We also had to design how it would attach to the doll. Once we were comfortable with the design, it moved on to the 3D printer. Then I sprayed them with Mr. Super Clear, and then airbrushed them with white paint so they wouldn't look so translucent. Then sprayed it with my favorite silver iridescent paint to give it that shiny, futuristic look. And I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. First, I start by brushing out all of the tangles. Then I trim about 2.5 inches off the bottom of the hair, and use my thinning shears to thin the hair out a lot. Then I cut the ends of the hair so it doesn't look so blunt. So you may have noticed a few translucent areas in the ears. That's because we put lights in them. We even had to source out these tiny nano LEDs. I mean, look at how small they are. And you know what's great? These are programmable too. These hook up to the same Arduino board that controls the eyes and the heartbeat. How cool is that? First, we had to attach the screens to the Arduino board. And began to install everything into the head. But before we closed everything up, we had to make sure it was still working. Thankfully it was. Then we attached the ear connections to the Arduino board. And here's a little preview of what all this tech looks like inside this tiny head. But you press that little button on top, and the eyes come on. Then we started hooking up the earpieces and everything else. Nothing else left to do except for to show her off to you. And here she is. I will say that the video is sped up quite a bit so I could fit everything in. So the lights aren't moving that quickly, it's more of a slow, calculated heartbeat. These are just a few of the easier things we chose to program. We plan on programming a lot more colors and animation to this doll. But this is a good small example of what we can do. That's one of the wonderful things about a doll like this. She's ever changing. So that competition happened at the end of March and I won! I'm so thankful to everyone who voted for my doll. There were so many amazing entries, so I'm still shocked. The original creator of Blythe dolls is a woman named Allison Katzman. So because this doll is supposed to represent the future of Blythe, I decided to name her Alice 01, or Allison. Here are the off, on, and color changing buttons and the charging port. And we made her ears come on and off easily so she just looked like a regular doll. I love everything about this doll. From her faux hawk to her shoes, I just love everything. But I think her animated rainbow eyes and ears might be my favorite. We had to learn so much for this project. We had to learn electronics, programming, and even 3D modeling. I wasn't even sure how she was going to come out. And believe me, it was touch and go several times. But she turned out so much better than I could have ever wanted. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a delightful day.